like we have some persistent patterns in Appcues, like checklists. So, part of our free trial checklist is at the very end, why don't you book a demo with a sales rep? It'll be a lot more seamless now, instead of sending them back out to the marketing website for a form, which is probably already autofilled, but still an extra couple clicks that they wouldn't have to do if they could do it right in the product. And same for like, if they do specific actions, like you mentioned, hitting a limit or, interested in some kind of enterprise feature, it'd be much, much faster just to have them book directly in the product. And that's coming very soon.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Jared DeLuca, Director of Operations at Appcues. Jared started his career with a few internships in PR before joining a market research firm. That firm was later acquired by a UK-based marketing data and analytics company, where he worked his way up to marketing manager. He then had a brief detour from SaaS at Keurig Dr. Pepper in IoT marketing automation and connected panel ops. And finally, Jared landed at Appcues, first in demand gen, then senior Martech and ops manager. Today, Jared has been promoted to Director of Operations at Appcues. Jared, super pumped to chat today. Really appreciate your time.
Likewise. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
I'd love to start by unpacking that career transition from demand gen to operations and front-end development. I think the front-end part of it is a bit kind of unique, not super common. I think a lot of folks go from demand gen to ops because you're, especially in startups, like doing a bunch of everything. But I feel like the front-end stuff, the engineering part of it is a bit unique. Was this kind of an unplanned, fortunate move for you, or did you like thoughtfully pursue this?
A little of both. So it was kind of, we had a need on the team, but like everything else, kind of like my transition from demand to ops in the first place, was like, well, our ops person left. Who's going to pick that up? Probably the guy who relies on it the most, demand guy. And so I was like, all right, yeah, why not? And then similarly with front end stuff, it was like, all right, well, budgets are a little tighter. We don't have as much for contractors at the time, a couple of years back. And so it was like, I bet I could do some of that stuff. Like I was kind of interested in some light coding anyway. I'd done a lot of HTML, CSS over the years, just like with email or landing pages. And I was like, making something useful with JavaScript would probably be the next logical step. And so Appcues supported me on that one. And they were like, yeah, go for it. If we can have somebody in-house do that, even better. Because, like you said, marketing teams don't usually have a developer. If they do, it's at a much larger company. And it was something that I was like, all right, let's do it. I'm interested. And it's fun for me. Like we very recently had like a random project that I just decided to do in front of the TV one night. It was like our content person had an idea and was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had a lead gen magnet that did this? And I was like, I bet I could make that in like an hour. And sure enough, that made something that was like at least a prototype in like an hour, and we might put it on the website soon. I don't know. But yeah.
Do you think that folks who want to pick up a bit more HTML and CSS have it easier today because of ChatGPT and all these AI tools than maybe you and I did coming up into this space without some of those resources?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely like, I see a lot of articles and podcasts and stuff about, the junior developer going away as like a thing. And like, it's kind of hard to argue.
Yeah.
Like if you have the desire and the wherewithal to know how, like you still have to know what to ask for. And I think that's the important part. Like everyone who tells me, ChatGPT is replacing developers, I'm like, not really. Like you need someone who understands where to put that HTML and CSS, like how to ask for the right things, or it's super helpful if like specific, styling and things like that you can ask for. But it saves a ton of time in terms of the, just the keystrokes. That's been my biggest takeaway for it so far, is like, oh, if I know what I want, I can have ChatGPT help me out with it, and I can do that same coding that would have taken me 2 hours in probably 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it, especially for like QAing code, like just reviewing it, or when you're pressing publish and it's just not working and it's been 20 minutes trying to like troubleshoot it and figure it out. I'll just paste it in ChatGPT and say like, this is broken. It's not working. What's wrong with this? And it's never like 100% right all the time. Sometimes it takes a couple of prompts, but eventually like 9 times out of 10, it usually finds the issue with the code. And especially I use it a lot for like template language to personalize emails, like oftentimes Liquid or Handlebars
Oh
It's just
yeah,
like
it's great for
so
that.
finicky with like one little thing like capitalization inside of
Yep.
the code that you're using. So yeah, I use it a lot for that.
Yep. You missed a comma somewhere. There's a
Yeah.
pipe that should have been in a certain place or whatever. Yep. That's what I use it for all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think the perception of marketing ops is a bit more of a technical marketer when you compare like everyone on the marketing team. But I think
Mhm.
we're still a generalist in a certain sense. But your front end shops, I think, definitely qualify you as someone a bit more on the extreme spectrum of technical practitioners who also
Yeah.
understand marketing. In my opinion, this makes you a bit of a unicorn in the space. And
Mm.
most developers, for me, in my experience, are kind of allergic to marketing. Like they don't find it interesting. If they're
Yep.
working on the marketing team or in some type of capacity, it's kind of a tour of duty and they're just like moving on to the next thing pretty quickly. Why do you think
Yep.
that is? Like, why do engineers prefer working on product than on marketing and helping marketers who are bringing in users for the product? Like, we don't
Right.
have a product without the marketing team. Why are engineers allergic to marketing?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's something that my boss and I talked about a little bit when I started pursuing this path in the first place. Was along those same lines of, boy, how valuable would it be to have some development skills that also understand the marketing side of things?
Hmm.
And I don't know. I think it's at least in my experience, mostly software startups. Like developers aren't necessarily allergic to marketing. They just don't. They just don't even think about it.
Right.
Like it's less of a consideration and more it's like their thing is building and coding, and if you can take that and then do something with it, like get customers or you know, whatever that might be, like it doesn't even cross their mind in a lot of cases, like as opposed to a product team or someone like that who's kind of also in charge of bridging that gap a bit of like, all right, well, we need to find a market fit for it. It's more like a lot of the developers I know are like, give me requirements and I will build the thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's less about the next step down. And it is super valuable. Every time that I've got the opportunity to work, in Appcues, there's a lot of engineers that are like this, that do a great job of bridging that gap of saying like, well, what is the user experience going to be like? And like, how are we going to get people to use this? Like asking those really good questions. And I think it's common at, like the smaller you are as a company, for sure, of like, people who are thinking a little more end to end about things. But the bigger you go, like when I worked at Keurig for a bit there, it's like, oh no, these are very much engineers of you ask for and you get what you ask for. Very specific. So yeah, I think it's less about allergic and more like it's just they don't have the time or bandwidth or interest to even think about what the next step is. It's like, I made a thing, I have to make another thing.
Hmm.
And I'm like, fair enough.
As marketing ops folks, we like to think that we can master a certain tool, right? Like, look at all the tools across our stack. Oftentimes, we're admins and we're responsible for like a good handful of them. And
Yep.
when like issues come up, problems, bugs, whatever, troubleshooting issues by ourselves, reality is like some of these tools are so complex and powerful that sometimes you
Yep.
just need to lean on the support teams and like ChatGPT a little bit on the side too. But like
Yep.
sometimes it's a product issue. It's not maybe not like the liquid code or the handlebar codes.
Yep.
But like I find that the support team for Martech vendors isn't always an area that they're investing in to kind of the fullest degree. I know
Totally.
Appcues is a revenue hero customer. They're a
Yep.
sponsor of the show. And one thing that really attracted me when I discovered the tool and got to know the team was how innovative they are in the product, but also on the support side. Like they offer
Yeah.
24/5 Slack Connect support. It's just like unheard of in the
Yep.
SaaS world these days, like being able to jump on Slack and connect with my CSM or a group of people that can answer my question right away. I came up
Yep.
in the world of Marketo where I was just like waiting like a week
Yep.
and a half before I would ever get an answer from someone. And it was never useful. I was always wasting my time with their support team. Walk us through
Yes.
like how that's been game changing for Appcues and then leveraging their 24/5 Slack Connect support.
Yeah. So it's actually part of what drew me to revenue here in the first place.
Mm.
We were using one of their competitors before that, and it was this, exactly like you described. Sometimes it'd take 24, 48 hours before I'm getting a response. The response is something I already tried, so I have to give them more context and try to understand, okay, what's going on here. And when I started talking to the Revenue Hero team, they were like, oh yeah, and we have, we'll fit right into your Slack organization and you can ping us whenever you need for any issue, how small. And, in practice, like we have a lot of, we're lucky to have a lot of vendors that we do have shared Slack channels with.
Nice.
Which is great. Yeah. And part of, what we work with a lot of other small startups. And so it's like, it's super nice to have that communication, but I still don't expect the level of responsiveness that Revenue Hero has like really brought to the game. Like I haven't had that many issues, thankfully. Like their product also works great. But like anytime that I have, it's minutes where I'm like, hey, can someone explain to me why this person got this demo request? Like I don't really understand. I've looked at the logs and I can't really figure it out. And they're within 5 minutes, somebody's like, oh, well, you missed this thing. I'm like, of course, thank you. My bad. But yeah, it's so incredibly helpful. And like that alone was worth the switch for us, just to have that level of support. Because, demo requests for a startup like Appcues or a lot of companies is like, that's the lifeblood of the business, right? Like we have a free trial and the free trial is great. And that's where the vast majority of our leads come through. But anytime we can get a demo request instead, that's instant pipeline. And it's like, if something breaks with that, that's mission critical, got to fix it yesterday. And Revenue Hero is super supportive and helping us on do all of that stuff.
Really cool. Yeah. I don't want to make the full episode about Revenue Hero, but I'm curious to ask you, one of the most common features I'm guessing is like the lead to account matching. And I'd love to hear how you guys are using that. Like, are you matching existing customers to CSMs when new folks are coming in? Are you matching existing prospects to accounts that sales is already working on? Like walk us through how you're leveraging that feature.
Yeah, so we haven't really started with the CSM use case yet. I could definitely imagine a world where we do that probably in the not too distant future. But at the moment, it's all prospect-based stuff. And that's been huge for us. Like like I said, we were using a competitor before and they also had some account matching, but it wasn't at the level of like the fuzzy account matching that Revenue Hero does that I think makes them particularly unique. Like I also mentioned, we have a free trial. And so we get hundreds of people signing up for the free trial every week. And one of our biggest pushes, call to action once you're in the trial is, why don't you try talking to a salesperson? They can help you with this. And so having that account, like they are already assigned to somebody, whether they know it or not, within 5-10 minutes of signing up for a trial, they have a dedicated account executive. And it's like, if we can match them to somebody right away, great. If they're signing up with like a domain that's not exactly the same domain, or if they're signing up with a personal email, but we can somehow do some matching in HubSpot and Salesforce, we use a little of both to do that matching on the person to get that right and get them connected to the right AE. That's huge. So we definitely rely on that a lot. And then it's otherwise our territories are super simple. So it's like, first step is account matching. If this person is owned or this account is owned, great. If not, it's headcount based. Like, what are you? Do you have more than 500 employees or less? And you fall into a couple buckets based on that, but it's nice and easy.
Very cool. I feel like, calendar booking tools and like demo form requests, it's usually thought of as like just on this site and like homepage and pricing page, and that's where folks kind of like pigeonhole that those use cases, right? But you just walked through a couple of other ones where, maybe you're a product-led company a bit more like Appcues is, and you're pushing folks to a free trial as an option. Like, actually see what the product is, get your hands on it before you jump into a demo and have to chat with the salesperson. But once people become like product qualified leads or they're doing something in the product, then you can surface demo forms. And there's also the use case of like existing customers who are maybe in a lower pricing tier who are getting close to like their limits or something like that. And you can surface like the option of chatting with a rep there. So talk to us about like how Appcues has integrated Revenue Hero for Appcues customers. And like, are you leveraging that like booking, like showing those bookings, basically like Revenue Hero scheduler for specific segmented users or events when they do something on the product? Are you making use of that today, or is it high on your priority list? Just curious.
Yeah. So it's something I'm working on now, actually.
Cool.
And by the time this episode comes out, I'm sure it'll probably be live.
Nice.
But we've got something that the Revenue Hero team actually helped us out with a lot, because it was something that was a big challenge for us in Appcues content. You can imagine we are users of our own product, and we're helping people do onboarding and things like that. We use that in our free trial. And something that you can't do in Appcues today is have JavaScript in an Appcues flow. And so that's kind of always prevented us from being able to present things like calendar bookings and things like that without using an iframe. You can use an iframe and get around it in a lot of cases, but sometimes that's finicky and doesn't look right, or the struggles of iframes. Not to get too technical, but the nice thing about Revenue Hero was they worked really hard on like building a nice proof of concept for us and said, "Oh, have you just tried doing this?" To embed that calendar right there. And I said, "No, I hadn't. What a great idea. Thanks." Like super proactive about it. And then I wrote up a nice doc on their docs about it. And we published something similar on our site with like, "Oh, you can do this now." But we don't use it today. Like I said, I'm working on it now. And it's something that we're going to surface in, like we have some persistent patterns in Appcues, like checklists. So, part of our free trial checklist is at the very end, why don't you book a demo with a sales rep? It'll be a lot more seamless now, instead of sending them back out to the marketing website for a form, which is probably already autofilled, but still an extra couple clicks that they wouldn't have to do if they could do it right in the product. And same for like if they do specific actions, like you mentioned, hitting a limit or, interested in some kind of enterprise feature, it'd be much, much faster just to have them book directly in the product. And that's coming very soon.
So you mentioned Salesforce and HubSpot. There are two CRMs that you guys are using. And you also mentioned before we hit record that you're connecting all of those Martech tools in your stack, as well as those two CRMs, to the data warehouse. Did you join Appcues when they already had a data warehouse? Was that part of your onboarding process, like this transition to the modern data stack? Walk us through like that journey there, and maybe talk about like the challenges of using multiple CRMs and how that impacts data pipelines and pushing that back and forth to the warehouse. They're super curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first joined Appcues, and I'm sure an engineer would probably yell at me for this, but we were using like Firebase for everything. And so I was like, all right, great. Well, like we can pull that out of Firebase, but it's going to be a pain. And over the 5.5 years that I've been here now, we have transitioned to having like a real data warehouse. We use Snowflake and all like the bits and bobs that go with that of getting those in the right places. Similarly, we were using HubSpot exclusively when I joined. Which is great. HubSpot CRM, HubSpot for marketing. Everybody's happy. We brought on Salesforce a few years later. We're a growing business and we're trying to do some more advanced things with our sales team that we couldn't necessarily support as easily with HubSpot at the time. And so it was kind of a natural progression. But then it was the challenge of, all right, well, we have Salesforce now. How do you want that to work with HubSpot and everything else? And I said, oh, great. Let's figure that one out as we go. And so since then, you and I were talking about it a little bit before we started recording, of like, all right, well, now the data lives in like 3 or 4 different places, and it's all the same data, and we have to make sure that it's all the same in all the same places, but in now all these other extra places. And so we still use HubSpot for marketing automation. It's our the first thing that most people are going to interact with Appcues is like filling out a HubSpot form somewhere on our website. But then eventually Salesforce is what the sales team uses now exclusively 100%. And so making sure that all of those things and all of those pipes are connected correctly, making sure that, one system isn't overriding the other one when it shouldn't be, all that kind of fun stuff. That's been the struggle and joy of the last couple of years. And I think we've got it down pretty well at this point, but figuring out how do we get stuff from Snowflake. Thankfully, I've got a great partner on the business intelligence side that has done a ton of integration work, a lot of custom SQL queries and code and Python that does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of getting that stuff out of Snowflake into the places where I need it. And then anything that's like a front end integration that I can do, like HubSpot, Salesforce, all that. It's like it's a nice combo of a little of everything. Doing all the orchestrating, and hopefully we end up in a place where nobody notices, right?
Yeah, that's the goal.
If you're good at marketing ops, like nobody should notice or have any questions about why is that different than this?
Yeah, it's the good and bad parts of marketing ops. Like when things aren't broken, nobody screams, but when things are working well, no one's complimenting you or thanking you for your hard work because it's in the background. Nobody knows, right?
Yep. Oh, it just works. Perfect. That's what I want.
No problem, man. No one complaining. I feel like I've done my job today, but
we have a few great days planned, and we cannot wait to dive in.
The vision is to set the standards for what it means to be in marketing operations.
What we're doing in this conference, we're actually shaping the future of our profession.
There's such an opportunity here. It's all of you who are going to be the leaders making that real. What we need to do is focus on data analysis, research.
Curious to ask you if you, like internally, when you guys went the Snowflake route, did you consider like a CDP, platform CDP instead of going Snowflake? Are you still kind of doing the both of them? You just mentioned like having to work with an internal BI specialist. Like my other sponsor on the show, Brain, is just thinking like reverse ETL. Did you guys evaluate like potential tools to just automate some of that, like no code segmentation, audience building, like Census does? Just curious, like on that journey there.
Yeah. So, well, we also use Segment. And so, we do have, again, a lot of redundancy in a lot of places for various reasons. Snowflake is, much more about the history for us. So like Appcues is generating, I don't know, like we have tracked some crazy billions and billions of data points at this point with people using the product, people serving data to their customers, serving experiences, right? So like exactly the kind of thing that Snowflake is built for, right? Serving that kind of massive data in the background and being able to get it relatively quickly or easily. And Segment we're using still for a lot of like real-time stuff. So we use Segment for almost as like a tag manager in some ways for in the product. So when we're having HubSpot or whatever it is, we have a lot of those things installed via Segment inside Appcues. So it's more doing that part of it, doing the processing and then sorting to go to the various places like Snowflake and wherever else. There's S3 buckets. There's a million things that that is the go between there. It's always funny to me when you start talking startup tech stacks and you're like, oh yeah, you just kind of add and you very rarely delete. And that's kind of where we are at this point. I'm sure at some point we'll probably try to pare things back or simplify a little bit, like we have at various times over the years. But yeah, did that answer the question?
Yeah, 100%. It's a pretty classic experience, I feel like. And I've been in your shoes as well. And we actually chatted about this, the recent guest, Vish Gupta, who is at Databricks, recently just moved over to people.ai. But like one of the main things we talked about was like the Franken stack, like adding stuff on because this person was yelling and wanted to get that tool. And then you're like 5 years into it and you're just like, holy shit, look at all these pieces to like, there's so much redundancy. And it's like, yeah, but look at our to-do list. There's all this stuff that we need to do, net new things. I'm supporting all these other teams. I don't have time to like simplify and like Martech stack minimization. Sounds amazing in theory, but like in practice, dude, I'm super busy. Like I don't have time to like focus on that shit. And that's just the reality of tech startups, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Unless it becomes a budget priority, like, hey, we need to axe this tool that's expensive. Okay. Well, now let's talk about how we can do that. Otherwise, it's going to stay there until somebody has a need to remove it or change it to something else. And maybe I like to take that as an opportunity sometimes to simplify things. Like if somebody is bringing on something new or like has a big issue with something, all right, maybe now's the time we can revisit, and maybe we'll kill a couple birds with one stone. But otherwise, it's bolting on more.
Yeah, I feel that. I think you'll agree with this one. No one is investing enough time and resources and data and operations these days. Do you think that the AI hype train has at least started forcing teams to reconsider resourcing in these areas, to have clean data, have good foundational systems in place? How closely do you think marketing ops teams today need to work with data teams to understand pipelines and explain marketing use cases? I don't know about you, but like I came up in marketing when data teams were not a thing. Like they just didn't exist. If you were looking for help with JavaScript or just like a BI person to help you get data out of somewhere, like you were shit out of luck. Like you were competing with product resources. All the engineers are working on product. Now most tech companies, or maybe I'm lucky and all my recent gigs have had one, but I feel like a lot of companies now have a data team whose sole focus is kind of like marketing ops, but they're servicing a lot more teams, and it's all data pipelines, and there's like security and privacy and all that fun stuff there. So yeah, like, do you think marketing ops folks need to level up their understanding in pipelines and data warehousing and like explaining more marketing use cases to those data teams?
100%. Yeah. And that's part of what drew me to really like pursue marketing ops as like the next phase of my career anyway, was like, boy, the writing's on the wall. Like we're doing a lot more data all the time. We're doing a lot more system integrations all the time. Everyone's asking questions that are really good questions. And you know, thankfully, like as far as my career goes, it's been I've worked in data for most of it until Appcues, really. Like the market research company, like that was the lifeblood of the business, was data, panel data, and getting it into the right places with the right hands. So it was like, we had data teams. Again, we were competing with customer facing teams. We're competing with product teams, all that. But it was still somewhat seen as a priority in a lot of cases we should try to get marketing the data they need, because what else are we doing here? And I think it's only become more and more important. And like you said, with the AI stuff too, like now it's people trying to get AI insights out of all their data. Like I remember when I worked at Keurig, it was like, okay, well, I have the question. I know what I'm looking for. How do I get the information? And it was like, well, you got to talk to somebody who's a Power BI specialist, and then you got to go and you have to go through 10 channels in order. And they're like, well, actually, we need to build a separate database that takes some of that stuff from that database, and we can marry them together. And eventually we'll answer your question in 6 months.
Classic.
And it's right. And it's like, well, now I could just take that in a spreadsheet and upload it to ChatGPT and probably get an answer relatively soon. I don't recommend doing that necessarily, depending on your data or how much you care about the accuracy of that. But I think, it's a little of both. Of like the hype train for AI is probably a little bit overblown in terms of what it's capable of doing today and with what amount of accuracy, but it's also kind of exposed that level in the business and that need for answering questions like this and saying like, well, why can't we get that faster? I could just go use an AI or something like that. Like, well, it's not going to be right. Like, let's slow down a little bit. I agree with you. And there's probably ways that we can leverage that to help, but like nobody's stopping asking those questions, right? Everyone always has them. What are our customers doing? What do people do in a free trial? And you're like, well, it's harder than it might seem to get that answer for a number of reasons. And we can all work on getting those answers better and faster. And I think that's what the AI portion enables. But if anything, I think it's more front and center than ever. And like, you know, with coupling in SEO and all that stuff too, of like, well, there's the Google black box of like, well, how do I know what's getting served anymore on a SERP if there's AI for the top half of it? And I know they do lots of varying of that, right? Like, like there's a lot less AI answers now than there were a few months ago because of people's questions in part. And so, yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think we need to, everybody in ops needs to understand a lot better where the data comes from, how it all works. If I had a nickel for every time somebody asked me something and I said, oh, actually, I know exactly where that came from, I wouldn't have as many nickels as you'd think. But I'm working on it. And I think everybody should be, because it's important.
I want to ask you about the difference between the role of a marketing ops person versus the role of a person who is in the operations team. And you've recently focused at Appcues on Martech and marketing operations, but your recent promotion is director of operations. And so I would love to ask you, like, what is the scope of that? Like, I'm assuming it's well beyond marketing. It's not director of marketing operations, director of operations. What does operations kind of entail at Appcues? Walk us through that.
Yeah. So it's more or less like the crux of 3 different teams coming together and their needs. So it's primarily marketing, sales, and customer experience. And so when I talked myself into this job, it was kind of like, right now we have pretty disparate operations centers, or like I'm doing a lot for the CX team anyway. I'm doing a lot for the sales team anyway. At this point, our sales team reports into our VP marketing. So like marketing and sales are more aligned than ever as of 6 months ago. And so it's like, naturally, the operations comes with that. Like I still reported to the VP of marketing.
Okay.
But the role has definitely expanded, and it's more like I'm dealing with the same stakeholders, but now I have a little bit more authority to try and throw my weight around a little bit. Like now our Salesforce admin reports to me, and it's like, okay, now if somebody asks me something to change in Salesforce or HubSpot, I can actually say, yeah, let's make that happen. Instead of before, it was like, okay, well now I need to argue for that person's time and make a recommendation and figure out all of that. Like this is a way for us to move faster, and more aligned too. Like it's, we didn't used to have, as easy of a window into what each of the departments needed and we're using all of our systems for. And so having a more centralized approach, like I feel like it's like a lot of companies do as you get a little bit bigger. Like a part of the growing pain is, boy, maybe we should have a centralized operations team. Everybody's asking for the same thing. Why are we doing triplicate work when we could just be doing it once? Or maybe it would be a lot faster using the 8 other systems that the marketing team has already compared to what the CX team might know that they have access to, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So for us, is more about alignment. And it made kind of natural sense to me to pitch it as like, well, why don't we could all save time and money if we do it this way. Just put me in charge. Yeah.
So you mentioned a few business teams there. Like you've got sales, customer experience, customer success, and marketing, right? Kind of all revenue driving teams. And I'm curious your takes on revenue operations, RevOps, and like why, when you pitch this new role or this new centralized team, why did you call it ops and not revenue ops? What are your takes there?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like if you're a good operations team, it's leading to revenue one way or another, in my opinion. And so it's kind of like take an extra word out. Like revenue operations is operations, and it's maybe more focused. Like I think it's a lot of times it's bigger companies that have RevOps, and they're like, okay, they do have a person who is doing just go-to-market teams, just revenue-focused operations. It's like probably 80% of my job, 85% of my job is that. But then there's like the rest too of like general business things and working with the product team, working with engineering, working like the other day it was like, oh, we need to renew the trademark. Like who's going to do that? I'll do that. Why not? Like anything you could think of that just kind of like lets the business function again, without people having to think too much about it. Like if I do a good job, people won't necessarily notice, in a good way. And yeah, so like to me, it's RevOps is just, like a more specific branch of the same thing. Most of what I'm doing is supporting the revenue teams, but not entirely. And so it's like, take a word out. I don't know. We're all too wordy these days.
All too wordy. And I feel like we're all too worried about what is that buzzword on my LinkedIn profile and on my resume, so that if people are looking for a revenue operations person and I'm director of ops, am I showing up in those searches? Do I care about that? Do I really need to worry about that? Like at the end of the day, it's an interesting debate because it all comes down to semantics and how you name stuff. Because director of operations in a health tech company like my last startup, there was a ton of ops focus on the care providing for like internal actual like members and people that are using our app. And so our director of ops was completely removed from our RevOps team and my marketing ops team because they were focused on like operations for a care team. Like, how are we going to find specific like coaches and counselors in all these states that have different legislations, and how are we making sure that we're covered in this and that? And so like, I find that really interesting because like operations within different industries looks way different than your classic SaaS like Appcues. But it's an exciting role for you because like you're getting your hands in a bunch of different pies in the company, which is an awesome experience and getting a taste of all these different things.
Exactly. Like I've had plenty of 8-word job titles in my career, and I was like, well, let's go back to like what does it really matter? What, like you said, like who's gonna search for me on LinkedIn? I don't care. I'm a person who likes to make things happen, and I like that's part of director of operations in my mind. Job description number 1 is like somebody has a problem and I can help fix it one way or another. Let's facilitate that rather than focus on like. Well, this isn't leading to that, or that's not in my job title. It's like, no, we have problems. We can solve them.
Saving the industry from another buzzword, Jared.
Right.
Folks appreciate your work there.
Thank you.
There's one thing I wanted to ask you about. We were chatting a bit about this when we had some pre-interview discussions. This is kind of focused on marketing ops and lifecycle teams, this idea of right message to the right person at the right time on the right channel. Like there's a lot of different challenges to doing that. And your perspective is that it's way harder than it should be. I wanted to ask you, like, are you personally excited about these advancements in AI specifically catered to like use cases for feeding content to a machine and letting that machine orchestrate all the messaging, the timing, the people, the segmentation? Is that just kind of like Black Mirror shit? You don't think we're anywhere close to that? Do you think we're kind of close to it? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. I think we're a lot closer than a lot of people think.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. And really powerful because, that's kind of the marketing holy grail anyway, is being able to deliver those things without having to do the inputs in some capacity, or at least, some level of orchestration around it. It's like I was on a demo recently for Incremental. I don't know if you are super familiar with them, but like they're doing a lot of this stuff for website teams today of like, let's just have a bunch of experiences and let the AI sort out who gets what based on how likely it is to make them convert based on whatever black box data points that they've got, all that kind of stuff, which I was like, hey, that's super cool. And worth a shot. If it can make us more money, great. We're all in the business of making more money. And so, I think something that we struggle with at times at Appcues is like exactly that. How do you get the right thing to the right person? How do you get all that data in the right places? Like we talked about extensively. Like I know I have this in HubSpot. I can use that in Appcues. I can use stuff from Salesforce in Appcues. I can use that in my emails. I can use it everywhere. And the more portable that your data can be, the more likely you are to have success at getting the right message to the right person, because you're feeding in the same inputs from the same places, and everything in theory should be aligned. Like if you can send a push notification at the same time you can send an email, at the same time you can send something in their product, it doesn't matter if on the receiving end I'm getting, like, I hope I don't get all those things at exactly the same time. But like if I log back into the product and see the same thing that I got an email about yesterday, great. Like that's good alignment. And hopefully I'm more likely to do whatever the action is that that the marketing team or whoever wanted me to do. And like we can all use more of that. So I think letting AI take over for bits and pieces of that, it can't hurt. Like it's worth a try. And if it leads to better performance, even better. Like we've definitely had periods of complexifying things and also simplifying things. And it's like, you know what? Like, what if we just sent, like we used to have this really complex, drip program for new free trials that signed up. And it was like, okay, well, if they click on this button and they do this specific action, and if they don't click that button, then we can send them down this path. And you're like, all right, well, now we have 25 paths and I don't want to support any of these. Like, we're creating a big trap for ourselves. What if we just sent an email every other day for the first 15 days of their trial? We've done all of that and gone back and forth, and the reality of like what works best is somewhere in the middle. Like you want to have personalization, but you don't want to have so much personalization that the team managing it can't manage it.
Right.
And so like if AI can help with that, I'm all for it.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting components to this is quality assurance. Like, how do you QA the machine, especially if you're like, it's one thing to be like, to still have a content team who creates this content library, and the machine is restricted to only a certain finite assets, right? That the content team is writing, all that's QA'd. And so, you're not like sending anything bad or like wrong things to the wrong person. Like, what are your thoughts on how do we get to this model where AI is taking the wheel in a sense and orchestrating that messaging while still feeling confident, especially in like health tech companies and in financial industries, like where, sending the wrong HIPAA data or the wrong financial information to the wrong person at the wrong time, like could have like massive negative repercussions. Like, what are your thoughts on QA in this world?
Yeah, I think that's part of why we're so far away from that being a reality. Like in the regulated industries, like in SaaS, you can kind of do whatever you want. And so like, it's a great testing ground for a lot of this stuff.
So true.
And it's, somebody gets the wrong email, you send an apology email. Like, easy enough. Hey, our bad. And then maybe they click through more because you sent an apology that sounded nice and heartfelt, like sometimes that works to your advantage to make a mistake like that. Or have computers make a mistake like that. When you're talking things like, finance or healthcare or education or any of those things that have really tight restrictions, like we're way off as far as like using at least any tools that I know of that do this kind of stuff. It's not like the controls just aren't there yet. You can definitely specify and say, hey, don't do this. Like, you're just creating a bigger list of things to not do, at least in my experience, rather than creating like okay, here's how we want you to do a thing, because that can lead to anything. It's like, okay, do that, but also don't do these 150 things, and we're going to add to that every day as we come up with new bad ideas. And like, I don't see that changing anytime in the super near future, but I'm sure it will. Somebody's working on it.
Someone has to be. One of the pieces of it that is the most exciting to me, like you were talking about these drip programs that had multiple endpoints and managing like the beast of like a workflow that it's become, like letting AI figure out what is the lift, what is the incremental impact of having an extra branch if someone clicks on that button, or sending a message, or maybe like not sending a message and letting someone go into the product. Like it's so complex in email and automation teams to build out these like drip programs and journeys without like also thinking about testing them. And like, are we building holdout tests? Are we doing A/B tests? Like that piece of like letting AI take control of it and at least trusting that there's like math and science baked into those decision models, like that part excites me, because in a lot of drip teams there isn't any thought to like, we just like redid our onboarding emails, like, oh cool, like are you like doing a 50-50 test, are you controlling that? Like, nah, we kind of had a baseline before, and now we're just looking to see if we can beat that baseline, but like we're doing this during the summer, during like the peak of the season, and it's like that part of it excites me.
Yeah, no, same. And you're exactly right. I mean, like we're doing that with a couple of things right now where it's like, why don't we just change it and we'll see if it's better than before. And like having that level of insight and information that we can, like it exists, or being able to do those tests a lot faster. Totally agreed. That's the sweet spot for not having to need a huge team to do things anymore. Like that, there's a reason why we do a lot of let's just put it in production and see what changes. It's like, because we only have 2 people that are managing that. When you're like, when I worked at Keurig, it was like, we had a team that was email marketing, for emails. And on that team, there were specific people that are like, oh, I just do the promo emails, or like, And like my role was working on the connected brewer program. And it was like, oh, I'm the guy who's supposed to be thinking about the drip programs and things like that. For like, we can feed that some data and we can do some customization and information that we couldn't do before. Thankfully, I'm one person doing more or less this one job. But it's like the smaller you get, the more it's a lot of just, how can I make the technology work for me instead? And so if we can get to that point where it's like, yeah, the AI already thought of doing 2 holdout tests and then they came up with this new version that we can test against this other version. Great. I'm all for it.
Yeah, you're so right. It's such a different ball game in bigger companies. I had a short stint at WordPress.com, the bigger like automatic companies, like 7,000 plus people. And we had an internal experimentation product that was supported by a data team, a bunch of data scientists. We're building out like internal models, and it was like just a different world in like startups and companies that I've worked at before. But I wanted to ask you 2 last questions for you, Jared. It's been super fun. You just touched on Keurig and your kind of brief detour from SaaS. And like it was 2.5 years, so like not super brief, like still a ton of time to learn a bunch of stuff from that bigger enterprise world. But it was around the time where Keurig had merged, or like Dr. Pepper had merged with Snapple, and you worked on their beta program for their internet connected coffee maker. Talk to us about that experience.
Yeah, it was super weird and interesting. So it was as I was winding down in the that market research space, I was looking for something new, and they had approached me and said, "Hey, we're working on you've been working on a product with a panel of doing data and in marketing." Sure, yeah, those are all true facts. And they're like, "So here's what we're doing. We're working on a internet connected brewer that's going to feed the data back to us that we can then run marketing programs on top of based on the data on their coffee consumption. And we're going to be doing it in this test phase where we're creating a panel to get all this data that we can give it back to our partners." And I was like, well, that sounds like a pretty natural progression to me, at least at the time. And it was only once I got in there when I was like, oh my God, this is so different. Working at a giant enterprise like that is totally different, and working with these kinds of teams and all this kind of products. So it was like, it was in some ways supernatural. Like, oh, you're going to be in the innovation unit in the business team. That's like, it's like a little startup inside of Keurig. And I was like, okay, I've heard this before.
Yeah.
Sounds cool. And it was cool. And it like, I think, looking back, like I have, a lot of mixed feelings about my time there, just because there's a good and bad with every role. Right.
Sure.
But the good, I think, that really led me to where I am now, was doing like the in-between things of interfacing with the engineering teams and the data teams and with our partners, like going back to Starbucks and Dunkin' and saying like, okay, yeah, so we got this data. What do you think? Is this useful? We can slice it this way, and we can tell you these things about your coffee drinkers that you might not have been able to know when they're at home drinking coffee, which, you have all the data in the world about your stores and what you're doing. But like, do you know what they're brewing in their, at their Keurig at 5 o'clock in the morning? Probably not. I don't know. And so it was really cool to me to just be like in a problem solving role of like, okay, well, we need to get this to this place, this data in the right things. We need to integrate it with these systems, so we can start sending messages, doing all that testing that we were talking about, right? Of like, well, what if we sent this email to them instead? Or we really need them to connect. Like one of our biggest problems at the time was, how do we get them to connect the coffee maker to the internet? Like, there's not a lot of motivation to do that, as you can imagine.
Right. And getting people to opt in.
Yes, exactly. You're like, well, my coffee makes coffee still, right? Even if I don't do that. Yep. However, like here's some incentives and figuring out what works best and all that stuff. So like, it's exactly, I think, what led me to be like, well, actually, I really like talking to technical teams, and I like translating that back to product and business teams. And I like being that interface between everybody who can hopefully, solve the business problem and make us more money. Like that was what was like really interesting to me. And I was like, all right, I'm going to get out of here, go back to software for a bit. And I'm sure I'll end up doing the same thing 5 years from now.
Yeah. The beauty of marketing ops is like we can bounce back and forth between industries. We don't have to stick to one industry, but
Yep.
Yeah, like you, SaaS is where I've spent the most time. But yeah, took a tour in B2C, took a tour in B2C. But
Yep.
yeah, it's been a fun experience. Jared, super fun conversation. I got one last question for you.
Cool.
You're a director, team leader, a home cook. You're also a husband, a musician, and an amateur podcaster. We'll link out to your film podcast in the show notes there. Clearly, you've got a ton going on. One question we ask everyone on the show at the end is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance between all the stuff you're working on while staying happy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And something that I struggle with sometimes, like I know everybody does, right? And for me, it's comes back to like, who am I doing this for? And that's what makes me happy. Like always asking that question, who am I doing this for? When I'm in my home role, and like I do a lot of cooking and a lot of other things. Like I work from home. My wife works at like repairing musical instruments. Has to like go into a shop and do like super niche, super interesting. But like I'm here, so I can throw the laundry in or whenever that might be. And it's who am I doing this for? Well, it's my wife, and that makes me happy to make them happy. And same for at work. Like when I'm thinking about, okay, why am I trying to do this operations task? Why am I trying to do this thing? Well, it's for the marketing team or it's for the CX team, and I want them to be happy. And that gives me joy to think about like, okay, I made someone else's life a little bit easier, even if it's only a little bit, and it's something that they might not even think about that much. They probably would if it was broken or not.
Yeah, definitely.
Or not working. And so like, same with podcasting. It's like, who am I making happy with this? Mostly me and my buddy. The 50 listeners or so. I like to think that they get some joy out of listening to us. But like coming back to it, it's like, why do I do this work every week? Well, it's mostly for me. And so like, it's okay to do things for yourself too. And I think that reminding myself that like, think about who you're doing it for. Is it for the customer? Is it for your colleagues? Is it for your spouse or, your friends, or for doing something for yourself? I think that's all valid reasons. And just like always a good reminder of like, okay, this is what matters at the moment, is making somebody else happy or make their life a little easier, make somebody laugh. Like that's, I don't know, for me at least, that's what it's all about.
I love it. Super cool perspective, Jared. Yeah, we're doing this interview for the humans of Martech out there that are, trying to figure out what the heck is the difference between RevOps and marketing ops and ops, and do I need a data warehouse? Like, how do I work with my data team? So I think there's hopefully a lot of value that folks got out of this chat. I know I did personally. So thanks again for your time, Jared. This is super fun.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a blast.